My next guests are the duo behind the Strategic Advantage YouTube channel, with one taking first place at the last SoCal Open, the other taking second place and nearly winning LVO. When these guys talk, I shut up and listen, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing today. This episode is going to be a bit different. Instead of me piloting the show, Strategic Advantage is taking over to teach us all about the fundamentals of Kill Team, as well as establishing a growth mindset and kind of teaching us how to play, getting back to basics in the hopes that players new and old improve their game from the ground up. So, without further ado, the hosts of Strategic Advantage, Alex Squires and Emmanuel Mitsanikos. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Woo!
Hey, Chris.
So, but hey, it's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sure has.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Now, we're normally part of a little play group. We the fly-by-nights and everything. It's our little Kill team that we do. We go to tournaments and have fun, but haven't seen you guys in a while. But you guys have been rocking on with the Strategic Advantage YouTube channel. Can you guys tell us a little bit about what that is in case somebody hasn't heard of you yet?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we kind of focus on sort of, the fundamentals of Kill Team as well as how to play the game in general and some advanced tactics. Because you and other channels do a fantastic job of covering, meta and, particular unit breakdowns, and that's all wonderful. And we didn't need to get in on that. But we really wanted to, provide just something anyone can look at and listen to and watch to improve their game independent of what they're playing and how they're playing.
Yeah, it was kind of as we kind of helped each other get better while we were learning this game in its early stages before the tournament scene started to blow up. There was a way that we played and a way that we approached the game, and a lot of tricks and tactics that we had kind of developed by just teaching each other through attrition, really. And we wanted to share a lot of that, and that was the main inspiration for our channel. So we started off with a few bat reps, mostly for fun, but actually for BAO 2020, we did a beta test on our channel as well. We started off with another series called Cogboy Cogitations, where we get into really the nitty-gritty and advanced tactics of how to use the rules in the core manual to the most of their possibility. And most recently, we put together a Kill Team 101 series, specifically focused at newer players, not only to Kill Team, but also to Wargaming, to help cover the game from the ground up. And it wasn't until we put that series together until we realized how bad the core manual is at teaching this game.
Yeah, it's got all it's just like kind of like raw data, right? It's just like use it how you will, but here's just words in a book.
Yeah, just so out of space and disorganized. Like putting those videos together, I didn't realize how many times you had to jump around between 10 pages just to understand completely one phase of the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's there on the channel as well in its own playlist for Kill Team 101, from literally start to finish, from buying your first dice to scoring the end of your battle round, all there in about 8 bite-sized videos, so that way you can skip to the phase that's giving you the most trouble to get back to the basics there.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, there's going to be links in the description. It's interesting stuff, and it's important because, players new and old, they can benefit from, coming back to the basics pretty much. Like if you look, I was just talking about this with Matt Hurl. We had him on the podcast last time, and he's, one of the best players, and his main focus is, pile-ins, consolidations, normal moves, the core book tactics, gritted teeth. What are your specialists doing? Are you using that sniper spec? All of this stuff, it's all very basic. It's not like, oh, the Elites book made this super possible and stuff. It's like, no, this is core book stuff that a lot of these really, accomplished players, yourselves included, are, honing in on again and again and telling us to focus on. And I think it was kind of time to just like take notice and reaffirm that for the community at large, and just kind of remind and say, hey, look at what these guys are doing. Look at, we've got Emmanuel here who won SoCal. We've got Alex here who almost won LVO, just like a point away or something. And it's like, what are you guys saying over and over again? Fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, you don't build a multi-million-dollar home on the beach. You're right. You need a strong foundation to support that fabulous structure, and that's in anything. It feels It feels like one of those cheesy motivational posters that has like the little kitty dangling saying hang in there. But every success is built on a strong foundation, and wargaming is no exception to that. That's probably a good point, and I need to hop right into it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a fantastic segue. Look at us.
Yeah, look at us. It's almost as if it's planned. So that kind of goes into our first point, Alex, where it's really important to walk before you run. The basic techniques that we go into in a lot of our videos, our earlier videos, that dive into the advanced tactics that not only we share, but also things that, I mean, Chris, you're famous for that Infernus engine with Deathwatch and all these advanced tactics and all of these kind of gotcha moments that you could spring on your opponents. You can't get to any of that without walking. You have to really, really know the foundations of all of your options, all of the arsenal available to you, and every single rule in the rule book and how it can be used to your advantage and to your opponent's disadvantage.
I agree. Agreed 100%.
So it's really important because it's also super exciting, right? Because I mean, I definitely am guilty of this and have been guilty of this, of just seeing something that's just such a juicy tactic or such an interesting way to use a unit or take advantage of a situation, and get very, very tunneled down on these really, really neat tactics, but you can't get to the situations to use these advanced tactics that you're seeing all over the place or hearing about or discussing with other people on Discord if you can't build up to that. I encounter this quite a bit. I play orcs, if in case the listeners aren't fully aware. This is Emmanuel, and I play orcs pretty much primarily. And at the back end of LVO of this year, 2020, the year of Nurgle, we saw a lot of buzz around the shooty orc list that Kyle ran, that he found success in on the kind of super duper pod, I guess you can call it, on Sunday. And I had quite a bit of experience with that similar list. If you remember, Chris, it was what I was running, Crumpster Fire, my campaign shooty orcs list for the campaign we started back in November of 2020. So I was helping out the community on Glass's channel, as well as in the Command Point Discord. A lot of people approaching me asking for advice on that, and I was seeing time and time again people kind of hitting a wall with a list like that, because they're putting these models onto a table and they're wondering why they're not working, because they're not taking advantage of those fundamentals to make a list like that work. It's a very technical list, it's a very precise list, and it requires a very high level of positioning and play and flexibility, but it's not a Tau gun line. And when people look at the map, they look at the strategy, and they see, oh my goodness, I'm going to have boys hitting on twos. You're not going to, unless you really harness those fundamentals to walk before you can run with a list like that.
Yeah, because there's steps to that, right? It's not like you just put the models down and roll dice. It's like, no, this kind of like section has stuff it needs to do first. Like I played against that list, I would say 3 times at LVO, and it was, by the end, it was like, okay, this has a very kind of a set thing that it does. And if you wouldn't know that, if you just like were net listing and just put this on the board basically after seeing a roster, you're not going to do that well. And I felt the same thing after, what was it, SoCal last year with my Gene Stealer cults, right? Like all of a sudden I got this message, hey, I just saw somebody running your exact list, and it was like, oh, cool. And it turns out it was open board. It was like, ooh, that was specifically built for arena. That was not intended for open. Good luck with it, but that thing had something built into it that I was messing with there. It was very specific to that pack and all of that.
Yeah, and not only just specific to the pack, but specific to like the simple rules that you're taking advantage of to maximize the efficiency of all of those cultists, being that they're in that environment of arena.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the simple rules that people aren't taking advantage of or really hammering into their normal play that that they're missing out on, which then does not allow them to meet success with successful technical lists like that.
Yeah.
So I've had a thought as we're sitting here talking about this, the basic techniques versus the advanced tactics. It's unquestionable that when you manage to pull off some awesome combo, dumping a bunch of CPs into a high value model and shredding someone, like those are the moments we remember. Those are the really cool moments in Kill Team. I distinctly remember the first time that Emmanuel looked at me and was like, "Uh-oh, he's figured this out." When I pulled the taser goat thing on you, I legitimately thought like I had ruined our budding friendship with the move he made. But so I mean that like those stick in your mind, but you can't let those, just because they stick in your mind, that doesn't mean that's where you're getting the majority of your value in the game large. So those moments are awesome and we love them, but 90% of the time you're not making those 95%, 99%. You're not making those moves, but you're still accomplishing what you need to in the game with your basic stuff. And like the human brain tends not to remember like mediocre moments. You either remember the really awesome moments or the really terrible moments, but those mediocre basic technique moments are what win you the game most of the time.
Yeah, and it's even the simplest sounding rules in the rulebook that I would argue are the most important. Do you want to talk about like deployment and reserves, Alex?
Yeah, so just we're going to run through a couple of things, just some very basic rules that from the rulebook don't seem that complicated,
or don't even seem that important.
Yeah, don't seem that important.
Yeah.
Veteran players know the value of them, but we're just going to talk through them anyway. So in deployment versus reserves, it's deployment is in the book it's maybe a couple sentences and it's basically says, hey, alternate dropping models in your deployment zone. And so that's very easy to do quickly and totally screw up. You've got to think about it as you're going through it and watch every single place where your opponent is dropping their model and watching where they're leaving holes to put models in the future and what they're dropping into reserves to screw with you, to possibly come in on you close or keep something safe. And exactly mirrored, you can do the same thing. Throw stuff into reserves to deep strike it, or to, like I'll do now, I'll sometimes put a couple of my big guns into reserve just so I can pop them in anywhere on my board edge. And so, it's all of these mind games, all of these tricks, and honestly, the ability to lose a game if you deploy poorly right off the bat, just come out of this like one or two sentences somewhere in the rulebook. It's not an interaction that's made immediately apparent by the amount of text given to it in the book.
And then it's also what's behind those rules as far as what they do to the game outside of that box of just I'm putting models on the board or I'm putting them into reserves, because reserves also creates a kind of mental threat to your opponent that influences their decisions based on their fear of what is that reserve doing? Is that reserve coming into my backline? Is that reserve just going to walk in and just take advantage of a firing lane that I need to worry about with my movement? So you're influencing their movement without putting any models on the table, which is huge. And then there's one other layer to it that's even further removed from the simplicity of the rule. And this is actually something Chris and you and I had talked about, I think, before LVO of this past year when we were playing over at our local gaming shop. The idea of using the reserve early on in deployment to then allow you to counterplace when you were the first to drop in deployment.
Yeah.
So putting that putting a fodder model or choosing to deploy into reserves before any of the rest of your deployment. So now you're counter placing against your opponent who might be more elite centered, and it's more important for you to deploy reactionarily. In no way is that listed in the book, and
Right.
in no way is that an obvious outcome from a simple rule where it's like, oh, deploy into reserves and they come back later. Not necessarily, because there's so much more that one or two lines of text in the book does for you. So even though it's a simple rule, you got to think about what more can I do with those handful of words, and that's something that I don't think is used enough.
Yeah, I mean, reserves. I totally see what you're saying. It's like, okay, you get this couple words in the book, that tell you how it works, kind of, but they don't. It's like that's not all the content of it. Like let's say you lose initiative,
Mhm.
and or you win. I call it losing, but it's actually winning initiative, where you were supposed to deploy first, right? You're supposed to
Yep.
deploy first, and it's like, well, you put a guy in reserves. Now all of a sudden you've caught that tempo back up because now it's back on them. Okay, now maybe they're going to put the first model on the table, and you'll get to see where that is and deploy, accordingly. I just had this come up yesterday. I just had a game where it was a tournament game, and I was able to get the leader turn one because of reserves. That I had to cut off the head secondary, so that was the max score on that. Which is huge. You're holding one objective, but you have a 6-point turn. That's nice. Because you're getting the kill one, the hold one, and then 4 points for that. So that's a really really big thing. And then also. I'm so glad we brought this up because I've said this a lot and I haven't had a chance to actually put it in podcast form. But people play differently when you've got that 8-point guard plasma in reserves, don't they? Don't they? They're not as bold. They're like, oh crap, this can come down anywhere. They start playing more conservative, more bunched up, and now maybe they're not going to take chances that they would have otherwise had that 8-point guy not been in reserve. So I've told people before, it's like, dude, at 8 points for a guard plasma, I would put him in reserves just for that effect and not even worry if I get to bring him in. Because he's doing points worth of stuff, in that reserves, not even on the board. Maybe more than he would be doing when he comes in on the board. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff, man.
Yeah, and I want to put a pin in what you just said about he's doing more points worth of stuff, not doing his shooting or not doing his objective of what he would do on the board. Because we actually, I think at the end of what we kind of have written down that we want to cover, I think at the end we spend a great deal talking about that whole concept of what a model's doing aside from just what it does on its status sheet. So I want to put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that later, though.
Sure.
I like that you said that.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Right. Go ahead with the next one, Alex, because that's more shooting oriented and orcs don't talk well.
So a pop quiz for you, Chris.
Sure.
What's long range?
Long range. Oh man. So we would say over 50% of the model's ranged weapons distance.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's
simple, right?
It's a simple rule.
Yeah.
But
if you've opened the core manual once, you'll go over that, and it seems like you're over at that point, right? Okay, roll done, right?
Yep. But so it's tricky. So it's over 50%. Yeah, it's 50% or no, over 50% of your range characteristic. So, but the thing is, not everyone's range characteristic is made equal, and that's something you have to keep in mind. I go into that in the take the shot video on our channel, but as you're playing a game against someone, you kind of have to like keep in mind, okay, well, I've got a 24-inch range characteristic. He's got an 18. He's got a 36. These guys have an 8-inch flamer. Not that half inch is relevant or half range is relevant for them. But so all of these ranges are playing with each other. And so as you're sitting there playing the game, it becomes this tension of like moving forwards and backwards and trying to optimize, looking at the ranges. And for everyone, there's going to be a benefit of whether, okay, I want to close into this guy because he outranges me. So let's just get in a close range firefight because I don't want either of us to have a long range penalty. Or if you outrange the other guy, you can back off and be like, okay, well, you're still in my half range, but I'm no longer in yours. So now like you get your -1 range penalty, but I don't, sucker. So you're you're just helping yourself try to win that shootout. And again, it's all just off this very simple, if you're more than 50% away, you get a -1 to hit.
Yeah, I remember the epiphany moment that I had when the game was still new. My main practice partner played AdMech a lot, and I just used to get crushed. And then I remember the first game where it happened. It was like a level up moment where I had it. He had one initiative and had to go first. Was locked in his move, and I was like, "Wait a minute! His plasma calibers are 18 inches. I got 24. I can just be completely out of his distance and still shoot him, and he can't shoot me." It was like, "Oh my god! I'm gonna win against AdMech." It was just a fun, kind of crazy thing. But yeah, exactly. It was like the distancing is what made that possible. The entire win, right, was on the fact that he had an 18-inch range max on that gun. And I had the 24, and that's an interesting thing, that dichotomy there, because it's like, okay, at 24 you could be in on 12, and if you're the one with the 12, you're at short range, they're at long range. So they're taking a penalty, you're shooting full thing. Maybe they only get one shot, you will get two, something like that. Well, calibers are assault too, but you guys know what I mean.
Point to where on the caliber it hurt you, Chris.
Yes, everywhere. Hurt me everywhere. Hurt my soul.
And then once you kind of get to that level of understanding of these rules and how to use them, then you realize it's almost like seeing the code in Matrix. Blonde, redhead, brunette. That whole moment in the Matrix. Like you see that the shooting phase is just a grid of modifiers. And setting up shots is not setting up firing lines, it's not setting up angles, it's all about setting up modifiers. And you just see, well, this has a -1, this has a +1, and all that stuff, and your positioning is just to optimize modifiers. And then again, that just goes back to the basic rules, all these modifiers that we don't consider in shooting phase, and then again in fighting phase. Like, how often do you take advantage of intervening terrain in Melee? The answer is probably not enough, because I don't even do it enough, and I live in Melee. But the intervening terrain rule in Melee is oft overlooked, but can be used to such an incredible advantage for the punchback moments.
Yeah.
But you can't get to that modifier to your advantage until you master other things like piling and consolidation. These two rules, so often ignored, and seems so freaking simple when you read it. Oh, you can move up to 3 inches, done. Hand wave, you're done with that movement. But we spend a whole video, Cruising for a Bruising, on our channel, talking about how important piling and consolidation is and all the different ways that you can use it. And I think on your most recent, not your most recent one, but your the other heretic, Matt, Micromancer, who found recent success. I think he was 2 in bats.
Yes.
He got second in bats. His whole success being, not whole success, but a great deal of success being on mastering piling and consolidation. Again, here we're seeing a high-level player who is finding success by just using basic rules.
Yeah.
Not and allowing those basic rules to interact with his specific unit rules for the blood god, to just find just an astounding amount of success and mobility in what's oft looked at as a very static phase of the game. With piling and consolidation, just being able to move 3 inches and having to end up closer allows you to swing around for objective control, allows you to swing around to fight people who thought they were safe, allows you to get into combat with units that you would never want to charge ever. I'm looking at you, Frag Cannon.
Yeah.
And then also allowing you to take advantage of the terrain and intervening terrain, allowing you to punch a guy and then duck behind a wall and do it in a way that if they were to try and consolidate with you, they can't get around that wall. It's a very unique setup and it's very terrain specific, but you can do it and then give your opponent a -1 after you've already fought with them. So that way you don't have to suffer that same -1. And you can't do that until you're seeing these piling and consolidation rules for what they can do, not just what they're written is what they do. Because most people just nudge their model forward and like, okay, I consolidated and based you.
Right.
or pile based you. It's so much more than that.
I think I'm going to title this episode "What the Rulebook Doesn't Tell You," because I mean it just keeps coming back to that, right? Like they don't tell you, like it shows you, okay, pile and consolidate 3 inches, but it doesn't tell you like, oh, that stops a guy from piling onto a point, or that's for you now contesting an objective, even if the guy survived that melee, you're swinging in and denying that point now, with that movement. You're coming around and ending closer, but you swung maybe to the back of that model, and now you're on an objective. It's
And
stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know until you've messed with this a little bit.
yeah, and the I mean the big trick, and we talk about it in our video. We call it the slingshot. I've seen other people refer to it as surfing. Um, the way those rules are written, like you do your pile in, you end up closer to the first model, but then the way you've done it, you've actually ended up closer to a different model. And then so your consolidate, you end up have to just go closer to that second model.
Mhm.
So you can essentially surf, not quite 6 inches because you're kind of going around models, but surf or slingshot, maybe 4.5, 5 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge amount of distance. You can get like way up on an objective that your opponent thought you didn't have a chance of getting to.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden the entire objective game has been turned on its head.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's a very common misconception that you see mixed up in Discord chats and things like that, where they talk about fighting as if that means attack. But no, fight is an entire sequence of possibilities, starting with pile in. And so, like for example, depending on how the pack has ruled it, if you're allowed to do that up and at him for a guy who was normally ineligible, that's a pile in 3 inches away towards the closest enemy model. So you could have a guy who was not in combat, pile in 3, make your attacks, consolidate 3 to the back of him. You're a Corn Berserker, okay, you're going to fight again, boom, and now you've got that consolidate to move, 3 more inches towards somebody. Okay, nice, that's great. But they have that fight twice or fight a third time tactic, and it's like, okay, that's another 3 inches in, another bunch of attacks, another 3-inch consolidate, and that's how many inches is that to have, 6 inches times 3 potential movement through their back line to get where you want to go. And it's like, this is why I've said before, like things like Hormagaunts, maybe they don't want to kill. They're there for the positional and the wrapping and tagging kind of a thing, because they have that 6-inch pile in and consolidate. So it gets even crazier for them.
That's definitely enough inches for a good time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Alex.
This is what I'm here for, gentlemen.
And to kind of back up a little bit to your point of just discussions and misconceptions and all of that, it all kind of comes down to reading the manual, right? And even though, as you're going to title the episode, likely what the core manual doesn't tell you, it kind of does and doesn't at the same time. For a new player, there's often way too many times that we see questions, or there's disagreements or misconceptions that could be solved by quite literally just reading the manual. And I feel that a lot of players are either intimidated by it, either don't have it, or just hope to learn the game without having to read the manual. But reading the manual is so important, but also revisiting the manual. Even now, I still pick up the core manual and read through the core rules every once in a while, because every time you go through them with so many things that the rules don't tell you, you're coming to it with a whole different set of experience, a whole fresh set of eyes, and a whole different perspective when you're coming to it after having played the game for a year and a half, 2 years, hopefully more. But every time you read through that manual, that's when you pick up on all these new interactions and new possibilities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we
And
actually. Oh,
this
go
is.
for it.
I was just going to say, and this is important. It truly is important for players of all skill levels, whether you're beginning, whether you're an expert. Emmanuel and I have both gone back within the past couple weeks to look at things. It's constant. Like, don't rely if you're looking at a rules interaction, you're not quite sure how it works. Don't rely on your memory. Go back and check the actual rule.
Yeah.
To see what happens. There was one debate you and I had, Chris, when remember over the horrors and whether or not they can move.
I was just going
like
to talk about that.
after splitting. Yeah. Okay. So you go ahead. You explain it.
Oh, I was just going to say that. So there's been rulings and stuff that have gone back and forth on this. The question is, what happens when a pink horror does Perils of the Warp and kills himself? The splits come on basically at the same time as mortal wounds are divvied out. So the question is, do you even get to place the blues? Because they would now, in some interpretations, be being hit by those mortal wounds as they were placed. And the fact of the matter is we've had it ruled to where, like, at Tournament A, they automatically die. Tournament B, no, you get to place the blues. But the rulebook just tells you. It says when there's two effects that happen at the same time, simultaneous things, the person with initiative gets to choose. So it's only 50% of the time that those blues would be dying. It just depends on, did the demon player have initiative or the other guy? And it's clear for you in the book. It's right there for you. And it was this hotly kind of debated thing for a while now that has been ruled on and all this stuff, and FAQs written and stuff for events that was right there in the book.
I'd actually forgotten about that half of it. I was thinking about a different horror debate you and I were having.
Oh, geez. Okay, so you're talking about the reserves thing, right? Are they counted?
Yeah, like the whether or not they can actually like move if someone splits them in that turn.
So reinforcements, because that's different from reserves, right?
Versus reserves.
Yes.
And I remember you and I went back and forth, and I'm pretty sure like we were debating back and forth and kind of cross talking a little bit, until you and I started going in and being like, okay, look at this paragraph on page whatever core book, and then we pulled in sections from Elite, and then we pulled in sections from a White Dwarf.
Yes.
And it was literally like citations, like it was like writing a scientific paper. We had citations and interlinked theorems. Eventually came to our conclusion, but it was only because we RTFM these 3 books and we're able to actually have the literal text in screenshots one after another and looking at them and be like, okay, we understand this now.
Yes, it became very clear. There was no discussion further after that. It was just like, yep, Alex is right. Yep. Damn.
And it was well, of course. I mean, but I'm not always correct. Don't hate me. But yeah, and so yeah, just I mean, in any of those moments where you're having those sorts of conversations and it's not clear, go to the manual, pull it up. If you're having a discussion, someone with like, hey, this is the page, this is the paragraph, check it out.
Yeah.
If they're engaging you in good faith, they'll go and look at it and read it and either come back and be like, well, counterpoint, provide their own example.
Right.
Or if they're not engaging you in good faith, they'll just mutter something and be like, no. And you're fine. Like they're good. And
actually, the troll can go back under their bridge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I actually recommended to you, Chris, you were building an FAQ and you and I were debating some other point. And I was like, hey, you're BEERANID, you're a big deal. But on the other hand, you're just a dude with an opinion. What does your opinion on the rules, just because you're writing the packet, doesn't make it any more valid than mine, other than the fact that you're TO. So technically, yes, but it doesn't make it any more or less arguable. But if you go through in your FAQ and be like, this is my ruling, and this is backed up by this paragraph on this page in the book, you're gold.
Yeah, and that's something that I wish FAQs would move towards, was a citation. Rather than just this is how I'd like it played, I would really like TOs to start quoting a source for the ruling. And
there are some rulings, when they can. I mean, the Up and Atom thing, I think that's 100% TO dependent. I don't think that one has a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
and the veteran move, veteran advanced charge, I think that's also up for debate as well. But I think the North American perspective is probably more correct. But there's no text that you can say that proves one way or another definitively. So where you can, I think citations are good for that. But to get back to the point at hand, just revisiting the manual, reading the manual, and then one more thing to tag on to the end of that whole concept is being okay with being wrong.
Yeah.
because in YouTube channel for Big Hammer, Big 40K, Tabletop Tactics, there's one thing that one of the personalities there, Bones, said that's always resonated with me. He said, "I love being wrong because it means I learned something, and I love learning new things." And that's a great thing about revisiting the manual and not relying on your memory, because you might find out that you were wrong, or you might see something that changes your opinion. And that's really cool because you learned something new and you grew as a player through that exercise.
Yeah, that's really a very good way of putting it. And it's something that is just so common, right? Where
Mhm.
people, it's like, I understand, debating on the internet is a thing. People, they get their hackles up and stuff like that and get really entrenched. But like for example, just recently, somebody asked me, they came across a Facebook discussion about
Mhm.
the Mortals in Edition on the rail rifle. And
Mhm.
basically, you had somebody spell it out word for word, um, on rules as written. And the other person, it just kind of like, definitely favored them better to be doing it the other way that somebody had suggested. And they just kind of went with that. And it's just like, that's disappointing to me
Mhm.
because I think it stifles growth in the game.
Mhm. 100%.
Yeah.
I think we should move on to our next topic now,
Sure.
which is actually terrain. So E-Man, what's our general views on terrain?
It's tough to set up right, but it's also important to set up right. And the most important perspective you should have as a player when you're looking at a board with terrain, irrespective of how it's set up, whether you agree with it or not, is to not really think of it as an obstacle, but kind of think of it as something that you can use to work for you. And this just goes back to the basics, kind of like what we alluded to with modifiers being what drives a lot of decisions in shooting, and a smaller degree in the fight phase. Um, Seeing your terrain as a way to help you get the modifiers you need, and whether it's defensive or offensively, kind of thinking of it as the extra guy in the field for your team, not as an obstacle for you.
Yeah. So the rule book, kind of tends to present terrain in a not in a negative light, but sort of like it makes you not do things. It describes ways the terrain can hurt you. But that, I mean, those are the words in the book. You can, in the decisions you make in the game, you can use them to your advantage. You can, I mean, we all use it to block line of sight when we're trying not to get shot,
Mhm.
when you're trying to charge from out of line of sight so you can't get overwatched. It's, or, trying not to fall off terrain, which I do sometimes, when I get shot. Uh, so there's ways to use terrain to your benefit more than just, hiding. Um, and it just kind of, it's a little bit of a mental shift from, how does it, like Emmanuel said, how does this hurt me, to how can I make it work for
Absolutely. And
And the vertical side of the terrain that's often not used, well, when it can be used, when we're not dealing with infinitely high walls, but the vertical aspect of it and how that makes your charge a lot shorter, where counter charge is a lot longer, or how it allows you some really interesting ways to deep strike when you're measuring on a diagonal, that your opponent might not be considering, or the fact that always being on higher ground gives you, um, by definition, obscurity, because they can never see the tippy toes of your feet, no matter how low their angle is to you. All those aspects of terrain and how it can really work to your advantage. It's hard to explore those without really understanding the fundamentals of how the terrain hurts you, because in the way that it hurts you, it's also hurting your opponent. So make sure that favors you instead of your opponent.
yeah, or like you mentioned earlier, intervening terrain, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I have a bat rep that I did with Shane from Command Point, and he had charged one of my guys, and I charged back with a counter charge, but I did it so that he was in with kind of like a red shirt, nobody model, But now I had like a combat spec or something like that I was in with intervening terrain. So he had initiative. He was going to swing first, but he had a power claw and he was a -1 for intervening terrain. So -2 to hit me for that guy that now, oh crap, he's in with this good, scary model. And he was unable to pile into me because he was closer to the other model he had already charged. So I was able to, survive his attacks and then pile in the 3 inches with my guy. Now I'm base to base. I'm not taking that penalty that he had. And I hit in with full weapon skill and get the kill. So
Nice.
yeah, it's just like that's stuff that's there for you to explore in this game,
And that's 101.
Yeah.
And without understanding terrain and how it hurts you, you wouldn't have used that to hurt your opponent. And you would have just charged like, well, I don't want a -1 to hit. So you would have just charged immediately at him without using the terrain as your extra guy.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, he's going to get to hit first. All right, it's set up in a way to where he cannot get past this disadvantage that would be put on him. But for me, I'm not locked in. The same rules don't apply to me at that moment, basically, because the conditions are a little different. And just taking advantage of that was probably game.
Stepping back from one-on-one model interaction with terrain, just to like terrain on the board in general. So going back to the book, we don't have text describing how to set up a board in the book, but we do have pictures. And those pictures are generally not great. They make for beautiful still images to give flavor and inspiration, but they're generally not great examples of how to set up a board for a good game. So we made this point in our video. I don't want to get too much into it now, but when you're setting up terrain, the best rule of thumb is if both players are a little bit unhappy with how the terrain is, you've made a good map. That means that no one has an advantage. And so if both of you are looking at a map and going, I just wish this few little things were different, it should really like help me out. If both players are at that point, you've got a fantastic map and you're going to have a great game on your hands.
Yeah, and that's really a perspective that it's interesting because you guys, you have Emmanuel who's very orc, melee-ish kind of centric, and then you're Mr. Admech that is, a shooting team. So you have the melee and the shooting, and it's like maybe a realization that somebody else wouldn't have had, without so much of that back and forth with that dynamic as what you guys have had.
Yeah. And I think so the two of us have benefited greatly from, playing sort of the two ends of the spectrum against each other so frequently to, master our own aspect of the game, but then, be facing a master of the other aspect and learning that by osmosis and facing it over and over and over. But to really like learn that well, I think the most important part of that is casual play, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into the second half of what we wanted to talk with you about today, Chris, just because or what we wanted to cover in this pod. Because the first half is mostly about the fundamentals of the game as a rules perspective. And I think what's equally as important is the fundamentals of how to play when you're practicing or just playing your average game at your LGS, when we can do that again, with a growth mindset. And casual play, like Alex is saying, is the cornerstone of that. It's easy to get bogged down in the tournament grind because there's always a new packet to prepare for. There's always a new rule set, a new FAQ, a new set of secondaries, a new map layout, a new WinCon, all of these different things to prepare for. And it gets easy to kind of get into that tournament mindset whenever you're exposing yourself to a new tournament packet. That's always going to happen. You could see on the Command Point Discord that just as they're still in the midst of one tournament, now the World Wide Open is on the horizon, and they're preparing for the next one and the next one and the next one. It's always different packets, but with casual play, you could take a step back from that. And what we mean by casual play is playing with the intent of just having fun and playing the game, and not with that tournament perspective of I'm here to win this game. And what that affords you to do is to take a step back and have a conversation with your buddy that you're playing this game with, and really talk about what you're doing, what you're looking at, what you're worried about on the board, what you're taking advantage over the board, and vice versa. And that's, I want to say, about 95% of the games that Alex and I play together are exactly like that.
Yeah, any game that we're not, playing, on stream or at a pace to make a time cutoff, we're sitting there, we're, making jokes, being dumb constantly, but also, discussing and, pointing out, it's like, oh, Emmanuel will tell me something like, I really hate that you put that guy right there, because now this closes off, I can't come into this section of the board without exposing myself to being shot, and that was my plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I jump in, it's like, well, I moved him there specifically because XYZ was influencing me and I didn't want to have to deal with that. Or I'm moving him there because then the next round I'm planning on swooping these guys around, and showing that hand and showing that future that I'm trying to manifest from my side of the team. And by being an open board about that, then I can deal with the consequences of someone who does predict that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can also then react to someone who predicts what I'm trying to do in a way that I might not get the advantage to. And then Alex gets to experience, oh, that's what he's trying to accomplish with that. I would have never thought about it from that perspective. So now I can react to that or answer that, but also now I know to look out for that.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting
it's
because. Oh, I'm sorry.
you
ahead.
go, Chris.
I was just going to say it's interesting because we were just talking about this, about the deliberate practice, and that's what it kind of reminds me of. Is it's like, I'm not playing some games to necessarily win as much as to learn and to prep and help my buddy. Basically, like you guys, when you, like Udsickle and I, for example, a lot of times we don't even finish the game. We'll just go in there and roll out like, okay, round one, and then re-rack round one, and talk this over. Well, why did you do this? And I don't like how you did this. This, I don't think that this is a good play, and stuff. And he can be really harsh and hurt my feelings sometimes, but but it's a thing, right? And it helps me grow.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of, like, you see a lot of duos out there of people that play with each other, but getting in the mindset of casual play when you're not immediately in a tournament setting is also helpful when you're not fortunate to have a steady game partner for this game.
Mm-hmm.
Playing casually at your LGS or on Tabletop Simulator and having that casual perspective for your games, like if you and your opponent, if you only play one game, well, that was an opportunity for you to learn some stuff from someone who you might not have that conversation with if you just sit down there with the intent like, oh, I'm playing this game because I'm going to beat you today.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm playing this game to have a growth mindset, to get better with my faction, or to get some experience against a Tausch firing line, or what have you.
Yeah.
And if both players come to the table with that mentality and you're willing to show your hand as much as your opponent is willing to show theirs, then everyone comes out of that as a better player. So the casual perspective to the non-tournament games, I think is incredibly important.
It's really interesting. Well, we keep doing it. I'm sorry.
We're real bad at this. I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
But so in a non-corona timeline, I think that's also important for yet a whole nother reason. So you're playing a casual game at your game store, you're talking things out, you're having fun, you're laughing. Someone who doesn't play Kill Team walks up to your table and is like, hey, you guys are like having a blast. What's happening?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're sitting there and you're like explaining the game to them, and as you're like talking about this game casually, this new player is hearing like, oh, they're making these decisions, they're thinking about these tactics, and that's going to get hopefully that brings someone into the hobby and like, oh, this is really cool. Because we all love like the top table streams from tournaments as players who play this game a lot, because we understand what's happening. but I'm not going to be able to show my buddy who's never played war games the top table at LVO and be like, check out how cool this is.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, there are people moving around models and rolling dice. Like at high level, we like understand what's happening innately. We can just roll dice, and unless there's a particular rule interaction you're not familiar with the other person's team, you know what's happening. But just playing casually and be like, oh, I'm moving him and I've got to hit him with these penalties because he's hidden so well. It sucks. And, and then the person who's hopefully going to start playing is like, oh, this is really cool.
Yeah. What's funny is that what I'm noticing over time is that the difference between my non-tournament games and the tournament games is becoming less and less. Like I don't know if it's because of just playing tournament style or just prep for so long, driving it, but it's like, like this last tournament, it's like, okay, I'm running crisis suits. I don't care. I'm going to try and make it work. And, like I'm doing this stuff like yesterday, Alec and I were playing a game and we were screaming because I had 4 marker lights on a guy and my entire thing shooting. This is like, you've never seen this before. Nobody does marker lights. What is happening? So yeah. And it's just like, I'll get in with somebody and it's like, okay, I bet you took this. Don't tell me if you took it, but I'm guessing you took this and this. It's just like what I would be doing with somebody like Eric and stuff. But now it's like, it counts, I guess. It's just like the difference isn't, it's getting less and less, I feel, over time. The non-tournament games and the tournament games they're blending together now. After so long. Yeah, because I'll just straight up tell somebody like, oh man, this, they know anyway, right? Like at a higher table, you're playing against Michael Holy, he knows what you have, he knows what your secondary is before you reveal it. So it's like, man, turn 3, yep, but I can't score this now, and opponent runs somebody here. It's like, oh yeah, so I got to kill him to take away your engage on all fronts and this and that. And it's like they know, and they know. It's like, let's just play anyway. A lot of times it's just act like it's your practice partner, pretty much.
So on that note, so yeah, they know. That's a topic we have too. So we'll start this with an anecdote. There was a period of time last year where I was really the boogeyman of our playgroup. I was on a hot streak and just kind of tearing through everyone. And all of a sudden that stopped. I was still doing well, but all of a sudden I was no longer just kind of shredding everyone. And I loved it because I was being challenged, but it was just kind of perplexing. But Emmanuel can tell you what happened behind the scenes.
Yeah, so
he pulled some shenanigans.
So while Alex is spewing hot plasma and taser goads on everyone, he and I fairly consistently maintained our roughly 50% win success rate versus each other. And I can't tell you how many people kept approaching me and asking, how are you beating Alex? What are you doing with your orcs that you're beating Alex? Because he just wipes the floor with everyone. Mm-hmm. And what I told people was, Alex is working on an 8-core processor, and he's already decided exactly what you're going to do, and exactly what you're also thinking of doing, and exactly what your plan Z is. So go off of that plan. Play, and I told people, play unpredictably or play eccentrically. There. And don't play into the future that he's deciding for you. This kind of goes into a little bit of what you've been saying on your more recent podcasts, Chris, where you're referencing predict the future by creating the future.
Yeah,
I think that's the phrase that you use. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially that in a roundabout way, but also expecting your opponent to do the same, because that's where Alex was finding so much success, because he was creating that future and predicting what his opponent was going to be doing, knowing where they'd be, having a plasma already pointing there.
Yeah.
So by expecting your opponents to be at that level with you and not expecting you to have some unholy grasp of time and space and being the only one at the table with that ability, expecting that from your opponent. And then it's almost like when you play chess and you see these grandmasters knowing, I think this is what you said as well, knowing 10 moves into the future, you yourself knowing those 10 moves, but also not being beholden to those 10 moves, even if they are the best moves and the best 9 moves after that. There's like an example where I really upset Alex in an arena game was I had a boss knob that had a very easy charge on his plasma combo, his plasma and his comms, his sniper comms, plasma combo, whatever he calls it, Butch and Sundance, I
His
think he
little
names
engine.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, his little engine there. And it was a blind charge, Evil Suns with a 5-inch charge or something like that. There's no way I was going to fail it. Well, not no way, but it was statistically unlikely. And a comms power claw getting in on that is just going to chew through these T3 bodies, right?
Yeah.
But instead, I closed a door and left my comms spec there because even though that made a lot of sense for me to do that and turn off his engine, I could also turn off his engine by closing a door, forgoing combat for that round with that power claw, but then he could be somewhere else the turn after that while they're stuck in that hallway having to open the door and kind of slogging through that door since he has to keep them together. And that was not something he would have predicted in that scenario because it's not necessarily the right choice. It's not the math choice. The math choice is just go kill them. But then my guy's left over there where he can accomplish another job somewhere else. And by just closing this door, I've essentially shut those units off for 2 rounds because they're stuck there behind that door. They're not doing anything. And in the next round, they have to open that door and make their way through where I'm not going to be there anymore. So moves like that where you're creating your own new timeline that your opponent might not necessarily have predicted is only something you can get to by just playing a lot and just playing and just trying new things and practicing to be flexible and practicing to completely abandon your plan and form a new plan on the fly. And in doing that, you're kind of also preparing yourself for the next packet, because if you're comfortable completely wiping the board from what your plans are, what your play style is, what your objectives are, what your desires are on the board, then when that next tournament packet comes out, that's completely different. That you're already in that eccentric, flexible mindset where you can adjust on a whim whenever you need to.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
was
and so in expanding on the flexibility of with the revolving tournament scene. So you can practice these tournament games over and over, but then it's going to be not relevant when you start doing a new packet, new set of secondaries, new board layout. But if you go with flexibility, play a tournament game, and then a game out of elites, then a game out of core, then a game out of the casual packet,
or play Mousetrap with miniatures.
Play Sector Formaggio, which is it hasn't been realized yet, but I promise you, Kill Team community, that is the pinnacle of competitive Kill Team. Playing these weird missions where situations occur frequently in them that are bizarre, that only occur in 1% or very rarely in tournament games. But when you have the experience in dealing with them from this one-off random game, you're like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this can do. I know how to deal with this. You're that much more flexible. You're that much better able to deal with these bizarre situations that can occur.
Yeah, there was some kind of study that was done a while ago where they took new drivers and would do weird things like throw a ball in front of them while they were driving and stuff like that. What they found basically is that your reaction time is a lot slower if you haven't encountered something before. You were more likely to get into the accident than if you had. So like all of those weird little things that you're doing is probably priming yourself for success in eccentric situations, basically, that show up. They really do show up because like that's the thing. Like did my opponent expect that I would have 2 drones, with a TOW list? What? And 8 models and all this stuff? It's like, no, they don't expect that. They expect all of these drones and all this stuff and the 3 rail rifles and blah blah blah, not at like an 8 model Tau list and stuff, and it throws people a lot of times. They don't know what to do because they haven't encountered the situation before. So what you're suggesting, basically, I would summarize is perhaps training for the odd situations, maybe like that adversity training that people do, perhaps.
Essentially, and or just being comfortable with mixing things up in a way that might not be the completely quote unquote correct way, because I really don't think that there is a definitive correct way in any space. Because think about your list with so few drones from a completely different perspective. What it's accidentally prepared you for is that nightmare scenario where you're on the ropes and you're only down to 2 drones, right? You don't have a crisis suit in that situation typically, but now you're not so reliant on your savior protocol, so you'll be playing a little differently.
Yeah, crisis didn't do anything. So yes, you're exactly right. It's like I only had 4 models basically the whole damn game. Yeah.
But now you're prepared for that nightmare scenario. Or so many times that I'll play orcs and Alex will snipe off my knobs in the first round or the early on in the second round, and all I'm left is with boys, and not a mob of 20 boys, just a handful of boys, and learning how to make that work, getting used to those scenarios where I have to deal with a subpar situation and make it work.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same as what you're saying with the drivers, but then all the while playing those games, also talking about how grumpy I am that he took out my plasma, took out my guys with his plasma, and then him then saying how grumpy he is that now while he focused on my plasma, he has a bunch of boys in his backline and he's not happy about that either.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know what's funny is it just reminds me of something that I've found a happiness in Kill Team recently, from looking at factions and saying, how do I play this wrong? You know?
Yeah.
I have this list I'm just so in love with that is all Pathfinders, basically. I mean, because like you look at this is a great unit. I mean, 6 points for 2 shots at strength 5. What? Can advance and still shoot with assault profile? That's amazing. But okay, there's drones in that faction, so they get overlooked. But it's like any other faction would just be like, yes, please. I love these things. So it's like, okay, so I'm going to run all Pathies. And oh, you're used to a lot of drones? I'm only going to take 2. And they're not the drones that maybe you're expecting. It's like a pulse accelerator and stuff like that. And then
they're not the drones you're looking for?
Yes, exactly. These are not the drones you're looking for. It's like, okay, what are the 2 sub-factions you see in Tournament Tau? It's Tau Sept and Sasia. I'm doing Borkan because here's these 18-inch guys. I put a pulse accelerator on them. Now they're 24 inches, and they're ignoring long range. So they have a 24-inch short range, basically. Holy crap, this is really interesting. What's something else that people don't use? Marker lights. You know, it's like, okay, let's mess with these a little bit. And it's like, I'll tell you, man, when there's a big target that needs to die, like, oh, here's my, they're putting Terminators and I'm locked into this thing without a lot of AP and my rails really need to do work. It's like, oh, okay, well, these guys ignore long range. So I have a 36-inch thing, 50-50, to hit my marker light. You put a couple on it, you put 1 on them. Now all of a sudden you have 2 sub-factions basically against that model. I have my Sasia rerolls, but now I'm also ignoring long range. And it's just like through this, how do I play them wrong? I ended up stumbling onto something that I really enjoy right now, and is a very interesting build.
Yeah, and that's entirely why I say there's no wrong way. Okay, I can't say there's no wrong way because there are some models out there that it's just it's hard to find a way to make them work. But being flexible.
20 grots, let's go.
Chaos Ogrets.
We've done 20 grots. It's not, no.
We've had this discussion, Emmanuel and I.
We have this on film too. It's not good. It's fun, but it's not good. But I remember Luke Scianna. He's in our local play group as well. And I think he took co-third with you at SEO Day 1 of last year. So a very accomplished player as well. I remember having a conversation with him about 6 to 8 months ago about how he said, I think marker lights are better than what people give them credit for, but no one runs them.
Yes.
Because marker lights are everyone says marker lights are bad. And I had this discussion with him 8 months ago. And because you're open to playing flexibly and playing what you're dubbing as wrong, which I'll say is different, you're discovering that, wow, we discounted these.
Yeah.
And this kind of this did you see our list before? Because this perfectly segues in exactly what we wanted to talk about. This kind of our last big point is the black box conundrum, is what we refer to it as.
Okay.
And it has to do with the misappropriation of the role, not misappropriation, but the overemphasis of the role of math in all the decisions that we make in what we do in this game. Math Hammer is how it's termed, is incredibly reliable when at the scale of a 2,000 point Big Hammer game. It's predictable. Once you get volume, it's predictable. And while it has a very important role in decisions in certain aspects of Kill Team, it loses its reliability because of the small volume of rolls. And while it can help make decisions, it oftentimes casts a very dark shadow on something that might not be considered optimal or right or as efficient, because there's certain parts of that black box that certain parts of what you're analyzing in that black box that can't be analyzed with math, that then get overlooked, and certain value considerations are not considered or not weighted as heavily because there's no way to apply math to that. Yeah. And I cut you off, Alex. You were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was going to say the same thing you did. Okay. But yeah, when the Adeptus Mechanicus main tells you that math is not the be-all, end-all, you should listen. But yeah, so I mean, we can all do Math Hammer. So Emmanuel and I we've been playing Big Hammer recently, starting to mess around with it. And I was watching a game that Emmanuel was playing against Knights Cast Ben. So in Big Hammer, you've got a unit of like 20 boys, and so they all go charging in on this. Emmanuel makes something like 120 attack rolls.
Holy crap!
And by the time everything was all said and done, we realized that we could have just multiplied by the straight up probabilities, like for each success. And I think you were off by like
1 or 2 dice.
Yeah, it was crazy. But
yeah, when hitting on threes, exactly 2/3 hit. Yeah. Wounding on fours, exactly 50% wounded. And when you're throwing 120 dice, firstly, that's exhausting. Secondly, that's when statistics are the most relevant.
Yeah,
and right. Clearly, you boil down any statistic over volume, and you're going to get a predictable result.
And how many Kill Team players have had the moment where like, cool, I have 2 attacks hitting you on threes. You roll, nothing. You whiffed both. I mean, why are salamanders so popular for Marines? Because they give you that opportunity to, even though there's not a huge, like, by the odds, there's a pretty good chance they succeed. It just kicks them up over the edge.
Yeah.
And helps you out with these very real possibility that when you're rolling just 2 or 3 dice, it just does not go your way.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of misconceptions with Math Hammer. I think that people fall into the gambler's fallacy where they believe they're due, and you are never due. I think that people forget that each die roll is an independent determination that is not reliant on what happened in the past or what could happen in the future. It's its own thing. So, like they think like, oh, if I, CP reroll, my chances go up. Absolutely not. It doesn't. Mathematically, it doesn't improve your odds of that single roll, being a better thing. There's just a lot to that. And also, I think that there's a thing where people, I don't like the point for point analysis that people do. Like, oh, he got his points back and killed a thing. It's like, dude, there's so many things that can't be measured in a point for point swap, basically. Like, oh, my 8-point guy killed a 12-point guy, so I'm now ahead. It's like, well, was his a non-specialist and yours was a specialist? Because now you're losing. Was your guy on an objective and his wasn't? Because now you're losing. Even though you're up on points, that doesn't mean you're up in the game. And there's just a lot of these little things that I think people um, it gets like lost in the woods, I guess. I don't know what the saying would be. Uh, they get,
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
yeah. So
Help me
so
out here.
so with MathHammer and this black box comparison of model interactions, you can make certain decisions for fairly equivalent exchanges. As an orc player, my examples tend to be Orky, and you have Power Claw versus Kill Saw, as it currently is. Um, when you compare both of them, they both hit at the same -1 to hit. They both cost the same points wise. So it's a fairly even swap as far as that's concerned. But one has same strength, better AP, and predictable damage, 2 flat damage, while the other one has same strength, less AP, and variable damage. And you could do the math over 10 games and then realize that points are points. It's the same model, it's the same weapon. One is just a bit more efficient. So it makes more sense to take that. That's where black box situations are helpful. But when comparing outcomes and strategies and entire lists, the one thing that you have to make sure you consider when you're making these decisions that black box is one piece of a bigger puzzle, because what's happening outside the box, pun kind of intended and forced there, is everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
Yep.
All of the game, the terrain interactions, the rules considerations, the pile in, the consolidate, the modifiers on shooting, the deployment considerations, the mind games that goes with reserves, and everything else about the game is outside of this black box. And when decisions are made solely based on points efficiency, you lose what else those models can do for you that you can't put math to. This is the example of the 8-point guardsman plasma plasma unit that you put into reserves. Because you cannot apply math to that situation, because there's no way to think about math in this situation. But he does so much work by just putting him into reserves.
Yeah, from a strictly points analysis, your 8-man guardsman chilling in reserves literally has 0 value. He is not killing anything, so he has returned 0 points on your 8-point investment. But holy crap, does he scare your opponent?
Yes.
And it changes the whole flow of the game, the positioning on the game, where your opponent is going to be in that first round, because of that fear or that concern of that 8-point guardsman. And you can't apply math to that.
Yep. And
what you can apply to that is casual play, where you gain that experience and a commanding understanding of the fundamentals of the game and the rules exactly as they're written, and exactly as you can understand them once you revisit those rules and take the time to see that 10-word sentence can completely transform your entire play style.
Yeah, and just so people understand, some people are very literal, and they think that this would maybe only apply to an 8-point plasma. I do it with rails. You can do it with all kinds of stuff. A rail rifle in reserves, they're gonna watch their butt. Basically, they'll play completely different. They're maybe thinking of screening and stuff, where here's this 20-point list or something, maybe, or a bigger model list, 20 model list, maybe less, whatever. But they normally would be taking over the board. Now they're hanging back a little bit. They don't want you to get their leader, and they're thinking a little bit harder and missing maybe something else on this side of the board. So there's a lot of value through maybe what is not seen, and what the potential is, like what is the possibilities on the board. There's stuff that you access maybe by putting those points in reserves that you would be getting more from than having them on the table.
And there's countless examples of this. So so it's important to do these black box calculations. I'm never going to disagree with doing this math, but they shouldn't be the only thing that factors into a decision.
Yeah, the black box let us know, oh crap, the plasma is amazing. So it's like, okay, we're at this point now where we're setting up on the board and we see that in reserves. It's like, oh no, That's bad. This could go wrong.
Yeah, because you know what the black box told you?
What?
Marker lights are bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not. See, here's the thing too. Earlier we were talking about the Infernus engine and things like that. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like people get into a trap. This is kind of off topic a little bit, but it's like I feel like people get they become like a hound dog stuck on a scent basically of this trail, and they have to force certain things. And I've seen this in myself. Like, okay, this Infernus engine's real good. I want to use it, but hey, I need this only in death does duty end over here. But I'm so tempted and drawn like a moth to the flame basically to that engine that maybe I mess up somewhere else. So it's like it's important to not force a mechanic, but to have it maybe available. And that's something that I've always appreciated about Alex, Mr. Squires here, about how you view your army as very much a toolbox. That is like, okay, I have all this stuff that's available to me, but you're not chasing any of it. Or forcing any of it. It's like, okay, this is the right moment for this, so now this comes out, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So just kind of conversation brought that up and made me just want to kind of throw that out there for the listeners to think of.
Because I mean, yeah, because with this black box, right? What does plasma do? It shoots. Like, that is how it makes its value. That is how it kills things by math. But I am not at all afraid to look at a map or look at a board and go, okay, well, everything's going to hell. And then my plasma sniper goes charging into melee because that is now, like, I think that's my best path forward. Like, is he going to get his points back by killing something with this move? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Although I'm pretty sure there was a game we played one time where he punched a commando to death in this maneuver, which was hilarious. But like if you're just thinking about like plasma shoots, that's how it maths good. But it's not how you math good. Math can tell you how likely you are to succeed at something, but it doesn't tell you how to best play. Like, you got to look at the board, you got to look at your previous experience, the previous wacky moves you've done and have had thrown at you, and figure out the best way to win based off of that.
Yeah, because it's like maybe your gunner is better spent in melee stopping that model from shooting somebody else. It's a lot more certain, right, to get a 3-inch charge from out of cover than to risk trading shots with somebody somewhere else further down the board. And so it's like last minute, okay, they're it's a tied game. I don't want them to have kill one. They have one attack in melee. It's probably safer if I'm ahead to just get in there and keep it ahead. Just be like, okay, now you don't get to shoot with that big scary gun, and you'll win the game off of playing it wrong. Basically, there. Here's this. You've got a gunner. They've got a gunner, but now you go into melee. That's the unexpected play there, but it's actually technically what I would say is correct. Something I do a lot.
Oh yeah,
it's charging drones, charging. I charged my leader into a gunner just yesterday in a tournament game.
I think when we say the right move or the wrong move, it doesn't. The correct move is the move that lets you win. But right, I think we're using right and wrong in the sense of like conventional wisdom or like black box math, right and wrong.
Like, if you point those two gunners at each other, you might have a better chance to kill that gunner with your plasma than they have shooting back at you with a heavy bolter, for example. For example, that's the black box consideration, but outside that black box is everything else that's happening. So the right versus wrong we alluded to before is more so on the math side of things and not taking everything else that we discussed into consideration as far as not only just what's happening on the table, but what else you're influencing. And then what else that model's enabling other models to do by taking one for the team, pun intended.
Yeah, because it's like the black box kind of is something that should be considered as truth in isolation, basically. Because in an isolated vacuum, this model versus this model, whatever, leads to, yes, this expected outcome. But there's so many factors going on in the board, like you talked about. There's the terrain, there's the mission pack. Was veteran move legal, to do an advance and charge. I mean, there's all these other little components there. There's your opponent. Did he forget that his sniper rerolled ones? I forgot that yesterday. I forgot to reroll ones with my sniper. There's all of these things that the math isn't there on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's why it's the black box.
Yes,
because it's the vacuum, the two models in an empty void slapping at each other.
Mm-hmm. Well said, fellas. So anything else to cover on here, or do I just remind people now to go to Strategic Advantage on YouTube and subscribe, check out all of your Foundations videos. Good for new and old players, I should say. What do you guys think?
I think I'm tapped out.
All
right. That's all I got.
I'm good.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. As I just said, if you're listening, go check these guys out. These guys are fonts of wisdom. You've got some of the best players in the world here, winners of tournaments, at the high level, that are telling you to go have fun and to go back to basics, basically. So go check out their videos. I'll give a link in the description. And thank you guys so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.